our new poetry ritual, where we read one of Emily Dickinson's poems the other day. I couldn't remember how many poems she had. I knew it was a lot, but I was thinking it was like 700 or something. But I looked and it's actually like 1,700. So if we do a poem a day, it's going to take us 5 years to get through this. But, you know, and that's assuming we stream on weekends, which I'm not currently doing, but I was considering doing. But anyway, let's start. Let us get in the poetry mood for Emily Dickinson poem number 2. Well, that's 4, I guess, if I hold up 2 hands. But if we think about the poem yesterday, that's the coupling. And this mic is the caesura. Let's read this poem. Never read this one before, actually. Looks like it was written 1851, so Emily Dickinson would have been 21 years old. Or maybe 20 if it hadn't been her birthday yet. We don't know what month. There is another sky, ever serene and fair, and there is another sunshine, though it be darkness there. Never mind faded forests, Austin. Never mind silent fields. Here is a little forest, whose leaf is evergreen. Here is a brighter garden, where not a frost has been. In its unfading flowers, I hear the bright bee hum. Prithee, my brother, into my garden come. Nice. So there's a significant shift already there from that first poem, because even though this is, this sounds, it's still a far way off from Emily Dickinson's proper style in the famous period that she's really writing, but it's a lot closer than this kind of heroic couplets, long lines we got in the first verse. And it also has a certain Dickinson-like quality to it in that it's speaking very evocatively and very beautifully, but also sort of mysteriously about some unnamed thing, but something that's unnamed but located in a place. Here. The silent unspoken is here. Which is interesting given that Heidegger documentary we watched yesterday. It's like he was talking about the mysterious gift of the sky and the earth. My dissertation director, Krzysztof Jarek, who is a Heidegger scholar, a fairly well-known one, he wrote an essay once, which I actually haven't read, on Heidegger and Emily Dickinson. And I can see from this poem how you could make that kind of a connection. So Austin is her brother, right? Austin Dickinson is her brother's name. I'm someone who's like sort of poetically devoted to Emily Dickinson, but not by any means a scholar. I'm not an expert in her biography or anything like that. But yeah, I was worried I might be wrong about that, but no, her brother's name is Austin. So we can assume this poem is an address to Austin, to her brother. It's possible that there's this very literal reading of it. Austin, maybe he had, I wish I knew more about the biography, but maybe he had, either gone on a trip, or maybe he actually, I want to say he did move to like Boston or New York or something, which they lived in Massachusetts, but not in Boston. So he could have gone away, and this could be a poem of like sadness that he's gone and calling him to come back, right? And saying like, isn't my garden or this little forest where we live in our home, isn't this better? Isn't it or just as good or something? But of course, another reading, and this would be one that, and that seems like maybe there are some strong support for that there. But another thing could be, this is here, because in the later poetry you get that all the time. These kind of deictic phrases refer to poetry, right? Here is a little forest. And that could be a beautiful way to think about poetry, right? As a little forest. For one thing, it's paper, right? I mean, it's printed on paper. In Dickinson's time, in our time, it's could be printed on paper, but we're looking at it on a screen. Here on Twitch is a little forest. But here is a little forest. Could be here. Here is poetry. Here is where the language is alive in this poem. The language that I've carefully pressed and grown and tended to. As I was reading it, my first thought was, oh, this is going to be a sonnet, because you have that, although it's famous Emily Dickinson slant rhyme. I mean, sky and shine do not actually rhyme, but they have the same, they like internally rhyme, or they have assonance, that I sound, long I. Right, but so it's A-B loosely, but then it kind of goes off. Arguably, there's almost no more rhyming, but hum and come rhyme. And I read where not a frost has been, which is just, I don't know. I make rhymes when they are there, but that would be not necessarily the case that's how she would have read it or something. But it's interesting. There is another sky, ever serene and fair, and there is another sunshine, though it be darkness there. Most of those lines have 3 beats. Right? Yesterday I was talking about, with the first poem, how she was using heroic couplets, which would be in this iambic meter, da-dun, 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 which is not actually how English poetry, like Old English poetry, would have been written. It became synonymous with English poetry, but it's something that English poets took from other languages like French and Italian to make English sound more refined, which is to say more like French or Italian. But certain poets, like the modernists, like Pound, wanted to go back to this way of English that they felt was more the way English should be in poetry. This focus more on loose stresses rather than Allen Ginsberg called it syncopated, which I thought was kind of interesting, and maybe you could call it that, where you have these consistent hard stresses, but or beats, even, you could think of it, as opposed to a consistent foot that's the same throughout. But that was standard in Emily Dickinson's time. She is famous for doing something like that, but it was also standard in her time, just in the ballads, right? That would be, sold in pamphlets, ones that weren't particularly good, actually, but at least good in the sense of the great poets that you would study at school or something, but were very popular. And that Emily Dickinson at least definitely read some of. I mean, Chris Miller, the Emily Dickinson scholar, makes a good argument that that's has to be read as a significant influence on Dickinson's writing, and opens up in a certain way. That kind of roughness of the verse kind of opens up certain possibilities that she uses, and it sounds like that's going on here, because there's not I mean, I guess that first line you could read it as there is another sky, but that's not really how I would read it. I would read it as like, there's another sky, ever serene and fair, and there is another sunshine, though it be darkness there. Never mind faded forests, Austin, never mind silent fields. Here is a little forest whose leaf is evergreen. It's much rougher, and it has these beats. So I like that. Here's a brighter garden. Prithee, my brother, into my garden come. That's cool. You can see here that it's still early on in Emily Dickinson's career, but it also seems like, at least in terms of her coming into her own style and writing in this kind of American ballad, what would be the adjectival form? Balladic, balladorious style, versus this, which looks very much like Alexander Pope or something. And also, very, very Emily Dickinson imagery, right? The forest, the garden, the bee, the sunshine. So very, very cool poem, and a nice second poem for us. All right, 2 down. I think something like 1,775 to go. We'll see you for number 3 tomorrow.